What's up, guys, and welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. It is the second day of Kwanzaa. And so of course we're going to talk about the Holocaust. That has nothing to do with Kwanzaa, but that's just what I feel I have to get off my chest today. So without further ado, let's get started. So if you've watched any of my videos, any of my TikToks, or been on my Instagram at all, you'll know that I have gone on extensive rants about how awful our education system is, especially around history, and specifically with the Holocaust, and just Jewish history in general. They not only is it not required to be taught in most states, like even in my state, Washington State, we're pretty liberal. It is not required for the Holocaust to be taught at all in the state. It's highly encouraged that we don't have to teach it, which means curriculums aren't made around it, which means most of the teachings probably are not accurate. And trust me, the education about the Holocaust leaves a lot to be desired, and that's what we're talking about today, is the things that people don't talk about that we really should, because there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what the Holocaust was and who Hitler was. And I feel like if we cleared this up and we actually taught this in schools, maybe things would be different. Without further ado, I'm just gonna start listing stuff in my usual non-eloquent rambling. The biggest thing that we don't talk about is that Jews were not the only victims of the Holocaust. And I know most of you probably know that, but it's not taught in schools. At least it wasn't taught in my school. It was taught as a Jewish event. I think it's framed as basically the only Jewish event in history, because we don't talk about Jewish history at any other point, even though we have a long, rich history of other genocides. That's a video for another day. No, while there were 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, and that's tragic, there were other victims, because it wasn't that Hitler hated Jews. He wanted a perfect Aryan race. So anyone that did not fall in that category was also killed, not just Jews. And I feel like we mix that up. Like, we get both ideas across. We're like, oh, he hated Jews and he wanted the perfect Aryan race, but we don't teach the connection between the two. That's just like, oh, Aryan is anyone who isn't Jewish. That's not how that works. Aryan was a specific type of people, so that was a straight, cisgender, white person with blonde hair and blue eyes. Able-bodied, able-minded, who had a specific political ideology, and anyone who didn't fit into all of those things was killed and carted away into concentration camps to be worked to death or just outright killed. It wasn't just Jews. The Jews were included because guess what? Jews are not Aryan. And we don't talk about that enough. It wasn't just the Jews. It was the Romani people. It was the gays and the trans people. It was disabled people, both physically and mentally. It was communists. It was political opponents. It was people who had different ideologies. So many doctors, many scientists, many people with education, many kids who were in youth groups who preached something different than what he believed were also taken to these camps. It wasn't just, oh, he hated Jews and it's casual anti-Semitism at its worst. No, it was a case of eugenics. Eugenics being the idea that there was a perfect humanity, that one type of person is what can lead to a perfect human race. And so every other type of person is either forcibly changed, forcibly sterilized, or forcibly killed. And that's another thing we don't teach about the Holocaust, is that this idea of eugenics was not specific to Hitler. Hitler was doing nothing special at the time except for invading Poland, and honestly, that's the only reason the rest of the world cared, because he invaded Poland. Nothing else. He could have continued killing Jews, and maybe some people would have raised the alarms about it. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt was definitely watching, being like, this seems suspicious. But no one gave a shit about that until he invaded Poland, because that was the one thing he wasn't supposed to do. But that's a rant for another time. The point is, Hitler having the Holocaust happen, Hitler enforcing the Holocaust, was not special or unique to him, because this systemic killing based on eugenic ideology was very prevalent in the 1930s and 40s internationally. America was doing it with her own set of ideologies. England was doing it. Winston Churchill was the key speaker at the first International Eugenics Conference in 1929. Woodrow Wilson also attended. Denmark had their own little camps going on where they killed people they didn't approve of. Same thing in Russia, same thing in Japan. Everyone was doing it. It wasn't just Hitler. He just did something else that led to a worldwide focus. And honestly, the reason we don't talk about it is because of Hitler. Because there was such a widespread hatred for what he did, an obvious saddening, an obvious, like, this is the one time everybody got together and said, hey, this is wrong, that America put it on the back burner. Like, we were still doing it. We didn't think what we were doing was wrong at all. But because we all thought that what Germany was doing was wrong, we were like, hey, maybe we just back it up a bit. Like, political science was originally made to justify these actions, justify these eugenic sterilizations, these killings, these conversion therapies, these corrective rape. It all goes back to that, and we don't talk about this. We think about Hitler as a uniquely awful or monstrous individual, and he's not. He's nothing special at all. He is every single racist, he is every single ableist, every single homophobe who has ever gained power. He was just overly ambitious and charismatic, and he got people to follow him and believe in him because he didn't start out like this. That wasn't his main thing, And that's the difference between him and Trump, was Adolf Hitler. And this is something else we don't talk about, because I remember sitting in my junior year history class and our teacher going over what a fascist was, and she was like, fascists they usually take power using military control. They take over illegally and run a dictatorship. And I just sat there and I said, but Hitler was democratically elected. Because he was. He was democratically elected the chancellor. Did he turn into a dictatorship afterwards? Yes, he did. But he was democratically elected by the people because he was the people's party. He fixed their economy. He was for the working class, and that's what made him so popular. He got to power, and then he started his phase 2, which was eugenics. But you don't start with that, and that's what Trump did. He went there and he said, you know what? Fuck black people, fuck immigrants, fuck homosexuals. This is, America is for white people. But you can't start with that. Hitler was charismatic. He gave brilliant speeches that made people feel empowered because they just got fucked over by the rest of Europe, with the Treaty of Versailles. And so he said, hey, no, this is wrong. We're going to return us to our former glory. And then once that happened, he said, you know what? What if we just made us the perfect race ever? And that's how eugenics snuck in there. And we don't talk about that, how he wasn't just this evil person. He was like everybody else who has ever gained power and used that power to achieve his own goals, which he thought was right. Another thing we don't talk about when it comes to the Holocaust, the Olympics were hosted in Nazi Germany, and every country attended, except for countries that didn't exist then. No country boycotted it. The United States boycott the 1980 Olympics, because it was in the Soviet Union, were planning to boycott this Winter Olympics because it's going to be held in China. No one boycotted the Nazi Olympics in Berlin. Not only that, but they left all of their Jewish athletes at home because they didn't want to offend the Nazis. And that is so vile. That is so despicable and disgusting. Especially when there was no rule banning Jewish athletes. There were Jewish athletes on the German team. But every country left their Jewish athletes at home because they thought they would offend Hitler's sensibilities. Like, no one talks about the Jewish perspective in all of this. People just look like, hey, this really terrible thing happened, but look, we liberated the camps and everyone's a hero. Woo! But no. And now you have people thinking like, oh my God, it's the Jews versus the Germans. But no, it's not like that. And I've gotten so many rants about this on my YouTube channel, just in person. But Jews blame the West for it because you did shit like this. You actively let this happen until something else forced your hand. And that's the sad thing, is that if Hitler hadn't invaded Poland, how long would this have gone on? How many more people would have died if this was all he did? He didn't try to invade the rest of the world. If he just killed off the people that he thought were inferior, would anyone have stopped him? Would you? Because you guys didn't care enough to give a second thought about going to an Olympics in Nazi Germany. You guys didn't give a second thought about editing Night to leave out the resentment that the author felt about the West and their part in Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. You guys had no problem releasing a young girl's diary to the world, something that she did not consent to do. You people have no problem turning Anne Frank into a bisexual icon when she never consented to have this information about her released to the public. But you will speak over the Jewish experience. You will call us terrorists and lizard people and say that we're oppressors because we're controlling the banks and the government, and that everything in Israel and Palestine is our fault here in America because we're Jewish, and tell us that the Holocaust never happened, and tell us that we're just making it up. You will kill our rabbis and burn down our synagogues and deface our monuments, and then say that you guys are the heroes of history. That you guys are the heroes of World War II. Even though you liberated the concentration camps but left all of the gay people there because being homosexual was illegal in Germany at the time, and illegal in England and France and America and every other allied country. So they must actually be prisoners, and they must actually serve out their sentence. People were suffering, and you stood by and watched. And now people are still suffering in modern genocides, and you still stand by and watch. So what are we supposed to learn from the Holocaust if you teach it so poorly? If you teach it so one note? You can't just sum up a complex historical issue and say, oh, well, this really monstrous guy named Hitler, there's never been anyone like him in history, hated Jews so much. He created special camps where he killed them in sadistic ways just because he wanted to. That's ignorant. That is a selfish retelling because it leaves out where you are responsible. It leaves out where anyone could be the next Hitler because he was just a guy who felt like he was superior to others and he became in power. He got power and he was able to act on it. Everyone who is actively racist, everyone who is actively homophobic, those who vote for Mike Pence, or those who vote for Donald Trump, who voted for Reagan, who voted for Dwight Eisenhower, those who actively campaign to reinforce Jim Crow, who think that critical race theory is an abomination and will destroy America, those who think that gay people shouldn't be married, those who support Autism Speaks, they all have the potential to be the next Hitler, because that essentially, when you break Hitler down to his bare minimum, is what he is: a person who hates others because he believes that they are disgraces to the human race, because he believes that they are abominations, because he believes that he is superior in some way that is beyond his control, that is beyond others' control. And we don't teach that, and that is dangerous, because now we are sending ignorant people out into the world. You cannot look upon the Holocaust and say never again, and then do nothing to prevent another one.